Well, I'm currently directing a show called Comrades at the Waterford Old Town Hall. We open tonight and it goes until Sunday, and it's based on true events. The story of Niccolo Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, who were two Italian anarchist immigrants who came to the United States in 1908, and then in 1920, just by chance, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, they were arrested for a murder and a robbery. And because they were anarchists and they were on the radar for the police, the officials ended up going after them and trying to nail them with the crime anyway, even though they knew that it was impossible for them to have done it. And in the end, they were put to death by electric chair. Yeah. The idea was the government was trying to, at the time, the government was trying to deport as many immigrants as possible. It was right around World War I. And in 1915, there's a famous speech of Woodrow Wilson, who was the president at the time. And he talks about one of the biggest concerns that Americans should have is the immigrants. That the problem that they were facing came from within, and he encouraged authorities and the general public to be vigilant to get these people out of the country, which to me is mind-boggling that the president of a country would say we need to get rid of all the immigrants, considering at the time the States actually wasn't that old of a country, and all of the white people that were living there were immigrants not that long ago, and or their parents were, or their parents' were. So it's just absolutely mind-boggling. And so for a couple of years there, around I think it might have been 1918 to 1920, something called the Red Scare was going on, and it really only lasted for a couple of years, which is it started very fast and aggressively, and it ended basically the same way. And the Red Scare, people were worried about. They were worried about communism. They were worried about an uprising of the working class. And, you know, they really should have been worried about an uprising. But instead of trying to deport people and arrest people for things they didn't do, what they should have done was actually listened. Because the uprisings were happening because people were not being paid fairly. They weren't being paid enough to feed their family, a family that they couldn't even spend time with because both husbands and wives were out working 12, 14, 16 hours a day so that they could afford to at least feed their children something, or afford to have at least some kind of roof over their head. Often families, you would have, and this is not an exaggeration, you would often have up to 30 families in one small apartment or house. 30 families. That's crazy. And it's because they just couldn't survive otherwise. And so I think really what should have happened, and what did end up happening, was a movement toward safety in the workplace. We've all seen those pictures of steel workers up on the beams, you know, hundreds of meters in the air. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but hundreds of feet in the air. And they're out there with no safety belt, no helmet, nothing, and sitting there eating their sandwich or swinging from beam to beam. And that's insane. It's insane to expect somebody to do that, but that's, back in the day, that's what was expected. If you were desperate enough for a job, you would be willing to go and do those things. So what the officials should have been looking at was listening to the people and realizing, yeah, these are incredibly dangerous jobs, and we should try to protect people. And we should be giving them a fair wage for what they're worth, for the work that they're doing. And we should recognize immigrants as citizens. A lot of immigrants would come into the country and they would come through Ellis Island, but their paperwork just would never go through. And so they were not considered citizens. But during the First World War, the government expected them to fight on behalf of the US. It's just all this, you know, really crazy stuff. It's all happening at that time. So the play brings to light some of those issues, and it specifically tells the story of Sacco and Vanzetti and their wrongful conviction, and what happened during the 7 years while they waited in jail to find out what was going to happen to them. Were they going to be let go? Were they going to have to spend the rest of their lives in jail? Or were they going to be executed? The penalty for death in Massachusetts at the time was death. And the only way that that could be changed was if the Supreme Court or if the governor at the time stepped in and said, you know, just let them live out their lives in jail. So yeah, they had immense pressure against them, and ultimately it was well known that they didn't commit the murder, and even somebody came forward and confessed and gave great detail as to how the crime was committed and knew who the main criminal organization that did commit the crime, because it was a group of thugs and they were well known to authorities. And yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. But you know what? This story of Comrades, even though it is about a really negative time in America's history, and it is about people being treated very horribly, and prejudice, and you know, framing people, all sorts of things that are not positive. The message that you can get from it is that one person can make a difference. These two men, from their experience, got the world talking. There were uprisings across the world about this case while it was going on through the 7 years, and that just snowballed once the conviction came down, and it was known that they would be electrocuted. And then once they actually were, the snowball just continued to grow, and that itself is pretty amazing, because that was in a time when, you know, we didn't have social media. It would take oh, I don't know, it could take a few weeks or even a month to get a letter, right? Because they had to, you know, had to go over the seas actually on a ship. So yeah, it's just incredible that the world was literally called to action by this case, and a lot of good came out of it. A lot of improvements came out of it, and you know, their voice was heard. They did make a difference. Just two guys that saw something that was wrong and spoke up. One of the things that I do a couple times a year is I Google award-winning Canadian plays, and I found The Drowning Girls, which is by Daniela Vlaskovic and Beth Graham, and so I ordered that. And in order to get it, it comes in a 2-play volume, so you get that, you automatically get the other one in it. So I read Drowning Girls, and then I thought, well, Comrades is in this book, I'll read this too. So I read it just because it just happened to come with The Drowning Girls, and I thought it was so smartly written. It's a very smart play. It's well written, and it's well written in so many ways. It's well written because it tells the story in a very interesting way, so it's captivating. And but the way Daniela and Beth put it together all throughout, with them having to spell it out to the director and the actors, they give hints of how things are supposed to, the direction things are supposed to be heading, which is hugely helpful, because when you have a complicated script, and this is a complicated script, when you have a complicated script, you need those hints, otherwise you can completely drown in what you're doing and end up, you know, not being able to see the light of day through it. But yeah, no, they have written in such a giving way for anybody who's trying to produce it. But that said, it is a very difficult show, and the two actors have to work like dogs. They have to work like dogs. Not just prepping for it, but actually every performance. It's high energy, it's fast moving, it is intense, and it's thoroughly entertaining. And Andrew Kavanagh, no, sorry, I'm mixing them up. Jamie Kavanagh and Andrew Fleming are the two actors, and let me tell you, they go above and beyond with the amount of work that they've put into it, especially when we only had 2.5 weeks of rehearsal. And what they have produced is pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing.